On this Tuesday night, Ontario's plan to ban a strike by school workers. The controversial strategy.
We're making sure that the students stay in class.
And why critics say it goes too far. A horrific cycle of domestic abuse.
He wouldn't stop punching me.
The former partner of a Saskatchewan mass murderer talks about despair and hope. A Global News exclusive. Death threats against the Deputy Prime Minister.
Chrystia Freeland will get a bullet to the head.
New evidence as Convoy organizers testify in Ottawa. Plus, the burden.
Sometimes when I think about it, I feel like I'm back in shock.
And the honor of being this year's Silver Cross Mother.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin in Ontario tonight in a heated labour dispute that could affect tens of thousands of students and families. The Ontario government has introduced legislation to ban a planned strike by 55,000 education workers and impose a contract on them. And it intends to use a heavy hammer to do it, the notwithstanding clause of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 33 of the Canadian Charter is known as the Notwithstanding Clause. It gives Parliament or the legislature of a province the ability to expressly declare through the passage of a law a mechanism to override certain portions of the Charter for 5 years. The idea behind the clause is to give elected lawmakers control over important issues and prevent unelected judges from having too much power. Ontario Premier Doug Ford wants to use it to stop education workers, including librarians, custodians, and early childhood educators from walking out on Friday. Critics say that is a serious overreach. Global Toronto's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Colin D'Mello is with me. Colin, hi there. Why not stick to the bargaining table? Why is Premier Ford threatening to do this?
Yeah, the simple answer, Donna, is precedence. The former Liberal government here in Ontario about 10 years ago had done the same thing. They implemented legislation that imposed a contract on teachers' unions and took away their right to strike. Those unions took the government to court, and a judge later determined that their charter rights were infringed upon. They later awarded those unions hundreds of millions of dollars in fees in a settlement. The Ford government wants to avoid that outcome by using the notwithstanding clause to shield the government, the premier and cabinet ministers from any impending legal action from this union. The premier contends that this is all about keeping schools open after 2 years of closures due to COVID-19.
We're making sure that the students stay in class. I'm going to repeat that. They're going to stay in class. We want parents to know that we're doing everything we can to make sure students don't miss one single day in class.
Now, the use of the notwithstanding clause in this context is particularly controversial. It's raised a lot of questions, not just from the Premier's political critics here at Queen's Park in Toronto, but also from the highest levels of government, from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Using the notwithstanding clause to suspend workers' rights is wrong. I know that collective bargaining negotiations are sometimes difficult, but it has to happen.
And now the federal Justice Minister David Lametti is musing about potentially taking the Ontario government to court over its use of the notwithstanding clause, although they weren't so sure about exactly what they were going to do just yet.
Colin, the strike is set to start on Friday. What should parents and students make of all this and plan for?
Well, here's the thing. CUPE and the government are on a collision course. On Friday, CUPE says it will be going on strike 55,000 education support workers. School boards have already announced that some schools in this province will be shutting down. There is a chance, just a slight chance, that the two sides could come together with mediation over the next couple of days and hammer out a contract. If that doesn't happen, the government will go ahead with this legislation, CUPE will go ahead with its strike, and 2 million students will find themselves once again sitting at home.
All right, Colin D'Mello in Toronto tonight. Thanks. Lawyers for Premier Doug Ford and his former Solicitor General Sylvia Jones were in court today trying to keep them from testifying at the inquiry into the Federal Emergencies Act. Last week, Ford and Jones were summoned to appear at the inquiry, but are arguing they have parliamentary privilege, which provides immunity to sitting politicians. Their lawyers say there would be irreparable harm to the rule of law if that privilege was ignored. The inquiry commissioner argues Ford and Jones have overstated their privilege and their application should be dismissed. Today, the inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act heard about a death threat to Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, made back in February when protesters occupied the streets near Parliament Hill for weeks. Testifying today was one of the Convoy organizers who says he wanted the whole thing to be peaceful. Government lawyers argue organizers were openly fanning the flames of anger and in some cases making serious threats. David Akin reports.
I've been speaking with the guys. A lot of them were able to get turned around.
Trucker Chris Barber had just one motive to help organize the Freedom Convoy that would paralyze Ottawa.
For me personally, it was the border mandates.
Barber led the Western Convoy from Alberta, but when he arrived in the nation's capital, he found disorganization and chaos, not just among Ottawa's police force, but also among several different protest groups that had already arrived.
Nobody knew where to go. Nobody had direction.
On his social media accounts, Barber repeatedly insisted that convoy participants abide by a code of ethics.
This convoy to Ottawa next week on Sunday is a peaceful protest.
But some did not get that message.
Trudeau, someone's going to make you catch a bullet one day.
That was Pat King, another convoy leader who will testify later this week. That video was entered as evidence today by Government of Canada lawyers, trying to show there was good reason to invoke the Emergencies Act. And those lawyers had more.
The OPP apprehended someone in Ottawa who was wearing body armor and carrying a large knife, along with other knives, a sword, and machetes that were seized out of his truck.
I was not aware of that.
Barber also did not know about a death threat emailed to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Chrystia Freeland will get a bullet to the head. Prepare to feel our wrath.
The last thing I ever wanted was a letter like that. I haven't heard that story up until now.
The last question then is, would you agree with me that when you start a fire and fan the flames, it can get out of control?
Barber did agree with that, but he's also one of several convoy leaders testifying this week that are also facing criminal charges for their activities here in Ottawa last February. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
In Saskatchewan, there is still years of healing to do after the mass stabbing on the James Smith Cree Nation. Nearly 2 months ago, Myles Sanderson went on an early morning killing spree. When it was over, 11 people were dead, including his own brother. Now, in a Global News exclusive, his longtime partner is speaking out. Vanessa Burns opens up about the hours and days leading up to the attacks and the years of domestic abuse she suffered. Nathaniel Dove reports in a warning his story contains graphic details of domestic abuse that are difficult to listen to.
And then he's like, oh, you want to fight? And then he started punching me. He wouldn't stop punching me.
For years, Vanessa Burns had suffered. The father of her children, controlling, paranoid, and vicious, she says, beating her again and again.
He got on top of me. He was on top of me, and he had his knee on my throat, and my jacket was over my head, so I couldn't see shit.
This time would be the last, but only because it was the prelude to even more violence.
Myles Sanderson committed all of the homicides alone.
On September 4th, Myles Sanderson went on a stabbing spree, injuring 18 people and killing 11. Among the injured, Vanessa's mother, Joyce. Myles stabbed her and twisted the knife. Among the dead, Vanessa's father, Earl.
My dad wasn't going to go get help or anything. He chased Myles. He wasn't scared of Myles.
Speaking to Global's Ashleigh Stewart, Vanessa says Earl hated Myles because of how he treated her. And her journals, also shared with Stewart, show the aching loneliness and confusion Vanessa lived. Am I that desperate to be loved, to think I can change someone, she writes. Deep inside, I hold such pain. She had left Sanderson many times, but she always took him back. He preyed on her compassion for their 5 children. When he showed up again before the September long weekend, he asked for her help to sell drugs. Vanessa drove him around.
I was helping. I was finding the people that did drugs, because I knew who they were.
She left James Smith after he hit her again. She wasn't there when he went on his violent spree. In the months since his last release, she says he had been diagnosed as bipolar. She also thought he might be schizophrenic.
He was talking a little crazy during those times we were hanging out. well, I'm just going to go back to the city and kill myself. I'm going to go buy a fentanyl pill and kill myself.
Sanderson died in RCMP custody shortly after his arrest, sources tell Global News, from a fatal overdose. Free from the threat, Vanessa says she's focusing on taking care of her family. She went to a shelter after the last time Myles attacked her parents. Now she wants to work in one to help women like her. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Saskatoon.
If you or someone you know has been a victim of intimate partner violence, you can call the Canadian Resource Centre for Victims of Crime. The number is 1-877-232-2610. Coming up, the debate over whether the U.S. should support Ukraine. Battleground, Ohio. One week to go until midterm elections in the U.S., and the races are getting tighter in several states. Tonight, we're looking at Ohio and the contest for Senate between Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Ryan. Vance is a newcomer to the political scene, but he's well known for his best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, that was adapted into a Netflix special. Democrat Tim Ryan is relying on his experience as a career politician to try to sway votes. And in one small town outside Cleveland, voters have just one thing on their mind: the war in Ukraine. Our Jeff Semple is there.
Anything else? Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
This butcher shop offers a taste of Ukraine.
Yeah, fresh kvass. Just made now.
4,800 miles from Kyiv. This is Ukrainian Village in Ohio, home to the state's largest Ukrainian-American community. Luba Molikovsky's sister lives in Ukraine with a newborn. Their neighborhood recently hit by a Russian rocket.
I'm feeling so bad, but so dangerous, but what we can do, I don't know.
One thing she will do is vote in the upcoming midterm elections. Ohio's Republican Senate seat is up for grabs. It's one of a handful of states that could determine the balance of power in Washington. Opinion polls suggest that the race for Ohio's all-important Senate seat is too close to call. And among the deeply divisive issues dominating this campaign is America's ongoing financial support for Ukraine.
Let's talk about the stakes of this election.
Ohio's Republican candidate has said the U.S. should stop spending tax dollars supporting Ukraine.
I got to be honest with you, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another.
I wanted to ask about your position on America's continued support for Ukraine. We asked J.D. Vance to clarify his stance.
Look, I don't think that we can continue funding the Ukrainian war indefinitely. I would like us to de-escalate and spend American dollars on American priorities.
That position is backed by a growing number of Republican lawmakers.
I think if the Republicans take control of Congress, as it looks like they will, I see very little likelihood of funding continuing, at least at the level that it has.
The Democrats, meanwhile, are pushing for another aid package for Ukraine.
This is 700-some pages.
This retired journalist is documenting America's Ukrainian population. 45,000 Ukrainians live in Ohio alone. Many, including himself, are longtime Republicans, now preparing to vote Democrat.
They never voted for Democrats, but they see that they must in this case because Ukraine's very survival is at stake.
We've had tremendous support.
A group representing Ohio's Ukrainians believes members of the state's large Eastern European diaspora will also be voting Democrat.
The Baltic republics, the Estonians, the Latvians, the Lithuanians, with the Poles, the Jewish community, there's a force multiplier. So we have many, many allies in the community. I mean, let's face it, Ukraine is fighting on because the Western world's providing the aid and economic support.
And the future of U.S. support for Ukraine could hinge on this election result. Jeff Semple, Global News, Parma, Ohio.
Brazil's outgoing President Jair Bolsonaro has spoken. He didn't concede losing the election in that country, but he did signal he'll cooperate with the transfer of power. Bolsonaro lost the election to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva 2 days ago and has been silent since then. Today, he didn't acknowledge the results, but he did say he'd follow the rules of Brazil's constitution. His chief of staff told reporters he's been authorized to begin the transition process. Penny pinching and thinning wallets ahead, why Canadians feel they're on shaky economic ground. We know many people are struggling to keep up with their bills and are racking up debt. Well, now we have a snapshot of how inflation and rising interest rates are adding up. Equifax Canada says the nation's average credit card balance has hit a record high of more than $2,100. And new polling conducted exclusively for Global News suggests an increasing number of Canadians feel like they are on the brink. Anne Gaviola looks at who is most worried and why.
Even though inflation is starting to ease, we're squeezed at the pumps and at the grocery store.
You're wondering, when does it stop? Because before, like prices I knew only went up every so often. But like I'm telling you, I'm seeing this thing every week. Every week, I can't budget.
People feel financially beat up. 84% of Canadians are concerned inflation will make everyday purchases less affordable, according to exclusive Ipsos polling for Global News. 1 in 5 say they're completely out of money and there's no way they can handle a price increase for necessities.
Canadians are concerned about being able to afford the basic necessities of life, but they're also concerned about the holidays and whether or not they're going to be able to buy gifts for their family, their children, and their friends.
Women, people between the ages of 18 and 34, and households with children are most likely to be concerned about their finances.
Parents are the most concerned out of all the demographic groups that we've studied. They've got more mouths to feed, they've got more backs to clothe, and they're feeling the pinch more than others. They're worried about being able to put food on the table.
84% believe Canada could see a recession in 2023. And despite the tight labor market and worker shortage, 1 in 3 are worried they could lose their job if the economy doesn't improve.
And if we just look back to the recession, they have good reason to be worried. Younger people, women more likely to work in the service industry, for example, were more likely to lose their jobs and be laid off in 2020. So they've got very recent memory of economic hardship.
I work in the service industry and my work is impacted on, I need the place to be open to make money.
If anything, it might help me actually, because then I'll be able to afford stuff, Like if there was a recession and prices went down, then I could maybe afford a house in the future. We'll see.
The hope is this collective financial hardship will improve affordability in the long run. But right now, it's clear Canadians are feeling the hurt. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
The federal government is planning to increase immigration levels over the next few years. Last year, 405,000 immigrants came to the country. Today, the immigration minister announced new targets. The plan is to accept 465,000 new arrivals next year, increasing to 500,000 in 2025. The minister says it's necessary to help solve the country's labor shortage. Next, this year's Silver Cross mother tells me about her son and the heavy burden she is honored to bear this Remembrance Day. Everyone has their own way of remembering those who have been lost in war and conflict. And every Remembrance Day, one mother is awarded the Silver Cross. It is a heavy burden. She represents all the mothers and families whose children went off on a Canadian military mission and never came home. This year, it's Candy Greff from Lacombe, Alberta. Her son, Master Corporal Byron Greff, was the last Canadian soldier to die in Afghanistan. He wore his Canadian military uniform with such pride, his mother Candy tells me. Now it's one of the few tangible ways she has left to remember her son, Byron.
I want to hold my head up high, walk tall, because that's what Byron would do, and that's what he would want me to do. Mom, be proud, and I am.
He was her eldest child, good at hockey, mischievous, and goal-oriented.
He was determined and funny. We all miss that laugh.
As a teenager, Byron signed up for cadets, though the family had no history of serving in the military.
And then along came grade 12, and he said, I would like to join the military.
But did you think immediately that might mean he would be deployed at some stage in his life?
It did cross my mind. It did. And then I just trusted that the military would train him. And they did. They trained him very well.
His first mission to Afghanistan was in 2007.
It was a dangerous time. Oh my goodness, yes. That phone would ring, or I would see the news and I would see something had happened, and your stomach just turns. And you think, please, please.
Byron made it home from that mission. By then, he was a dad. He doted on his young son, Keller, got married to the boy's mother, Lindsay, and in October of 2011 made sure he was home for the birth of their daughter, Brielle. This is the only photo they have of the three of them. 2 weeks later, what Byron's mother feared happened.
Now, heavy black smoke could be seen from most of the city.
The armored NATO bus he was on was hit by a suicide car bomb packed with 700 kilos of explosives. He was one of 17 people killed. He wasn't even in active combat then. He was training Afghan soldiers.
That whole period must be a blur. It is. Yeah. I think a person stays in shock. And sometimes when I think about it, I feel like I'm back in shock again.
11 years have passed since his casket came home. Byron is now buried in the cemetery in the town where he grew up, near a memorial to all the 158 Canadian soldiers who died in Afghanistan. Her son, the last one killed, the final inscription.
They're all so important, each and every one of them. I believe there's a bond between all of the Silver Cross families. I want to do him proud and represent people as they should be for all of the pain that connects us.
And Candy Greff, this year's Silver Cross mother, will be in Ottawa for Remembrance Day. We will have live coverage of that ceremony starting at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 Pacific, right here on Global and at globalnews.ca. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the village of Kimberley, Ontario, near Lake Huron. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to us, and thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.